hell is that it is a metaphysical realm of sorts that exists below the earth, one where the souls of sinful humans go to be tortured by the devil and his demon minions after death. Today we'll be exploring the roots of hell's mythology, as well as the idea that the earth itself was considered to be hell by early Christians and perhaps others. Hell as a concept in Christian culture has been boiled down to the simplest of morality tales. While there has been much theological discussion over the centuries about the nature of hell, it became used as a way to mostly just terrify the common folk into being afraid of the afterlife, and thus more reliant on the church for guidance in this life. We now know that the more esoteric teachings of Judaism included reincarnation, but that this was hidden from the common people so that they would not become too complacent in their earthly life. Reincarnation was an open teaching in other mythologies, and the Jewish people were able to see that it led to some of the common folk caring very little about personal or spiritual growth, because they believed that there was always a next life to come where things would be different for them. The story of Jesus in the New Testament sort of solved the opposite problem, as it addressed the natural state of man's deficiencies and promised them understanding. This was a different time than our own, with a lot of different struggles, and something a lot of men faced was an ever-growing consequence to their own actions in youth. Sin was not some sort of counter God kept on you for little misbehaviors or impure thoughts, but rather, sin was the consequence of ignoring the wisdom of those who had suffered in life, taking the pleasure you can in the moment and truly not realizing just how bad the results can be decades later after making the same choice for pleasure over and over again. Jesus was the Son of God, and he came here not for the righteous, but for the sinners. He came here as a reminder to every man and woman that there were natural parts of life that they had fallen victim to, and that though they could perhaps find a way to rise above and beyond that, God is understanding, and knows that many people feel more trapped than they might truly be. And that is what forgiveness meant to the Christian people. The idea that these mistakes you made were still mistakes, but that God understands why you made them, and is just waiting for you to do the best you can going forward. It's the reason Jesus chooses sinners for his disciples. But over time, this led to a very simplified idea of forgiveness that just continued to embolden that destructive human mindset of seeking pleasure in the moment. The promise of forgiveness stopped being the way that humans coped with their mistakes, and it became the reason to keep making them. Hell, then, was something that the church began to expand upon in its mythos in an attempt to make people afraid of an afterlife, with the idea that forgiveness isn't always enough. Sources for this were found in the Bible, such as references to Sheol in the Old Testament. Sheol can have diverse usages like many ancient words do, and in the context of the Old Testament passage, Sheol was described as the earth coming up and eating a group of sinful people. This seemed to be a remnant of a tradition in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, which had Sheol as an actual underworld similar to what we think of hell as. In some mythologies, this underworld was where all human souls were sent to, a place that was dark and sad, but not a place of punishment per se, such as with the Greeks. The idea of hell existed in the New Testament, but seemed to go by other names, such as Tartarus. But hell was given greater elaborations over the centuries, essentially as fear-mongering propaganda to keep the people in control. Like with the concept of Jesus' forgiveness, however, the early beliefs that influenced the early ideas of hell held a lot of merit in the layers to their philosophy. Hell is a place in our modern mindset that is ruled by the devil, who was also called Satan, Lucifer, and other names over many centuries for various reasons. This figure's modern conception is a fallen angel who took over hell and tries to ruin humanity on earth. But who was this devil and all of his demons that seemed to work for him? The devil is referred to primarily in the New Testament as Satan, which has its roots in the Old Testament as Ha-Satan, or the Satan, or the adversary. This figure appears in the book of Job, which has some of the most ancient Hebrew in the Bible used in its writing, alongside the early parts of the book of Genesis. Ha-Satan translates as the adversary, as I said, but enters into a conversation with God alongside the other B'nai Elohim, which means son of Elohim. These sons of Elohim refer to the sons of God, Elohim being a word used for God in the Old Testament, much like Yahweh. Elohim itself was originally a plural, more polytheistic word to refer to a council of gods that surrounded the chief deity El, but over time the Elohim became used to refer to the angels that surrounded God and carried out his duties in the physical world for the Jewish people. The word Elohim would become synonymous with other names for a singular god, and B'nai Elohim, or sons of Elohim, would become the new term used to describe the lower deities or angels that surround God. In Job, Ha-Satan is presented as a child of God whose job it is to test people on earth, with God giving his permission. This is considered a learning lesson for both Job himself and Ha-Satan, who sees that he is wrong about Job and that the praise he gives God is not solely because of the blessings that God gives him. This tale mirrors the story of fallen angels found throughout Jewish and Christian thought, such as in the Apocrypha, the Book of Enoch. This secondary text, believed to be written after the original book of Genesis was composed, focused on Adam's descendant Enoch being taken up to heaven and being given the history and future of the B'nai Elohim, or the sons of God. In this story, the B'nai Elohim are presented as angels of God who were sent to guide and watch over humans, teaching them knowledge to help them leave behind sin and build great civilizations, such as farming and architecture and even astrology. However, some angels decided to rebel against God by teaching the humans knowledge and magics they were not ready for, as well as impregnating the humans so that a race of beings known as the Nephilim were born. These Nephilim are often translated as fallen ones, indicating the fallen state that they are in after being angels, though they were also translated as giants in various times. This is echoed in the Book of Enoch, which claims they grew so big that they burst out of their human mothers' wombs, killing them. It is not stated why the fallen angels chose to rebel against God in the Book of Enoch, which is dated to perhaps the 3rd century BC. In the much later 12th century AD Jewish Kabbalistic text, the Zohar, however, the oral tradition surrounding these fallen angels is explained and elaborated on. In the Zohar, it states that the sons of God were already envious of the humans while still in the presence of God. These angels claimed that humans were too sinful and undeserving. God explained, however, that the angels would be even more sinful than the humans if they were to take physical form, something proven by their own actions to take human wives and teach them those forbidden magics against God's will. In Enoch, it explains that the original fallen angels were trapped within the earth, and that at the end of days they would be let out to see the extermination of their descendants before being destroyed themselves. Enoch seemed to serve as a large inspiration for the Book of Revelations, which describes Satan as a star in the sky that rebelled against God and took 1/3 of the angels with him. He is described as being cast down into the earth and into a pit. All of this creates a sort of cyclical pattern of mythologies in the same chain, having a concept of hell not just as a place bad people go to after death, but a place they can only go to after first being cast into the earth. This is elaborated on in writings that also existed in the early centuries of Christianity, but which had some vastly different teachings about Jesus and God overall, even if sharing very similar frameworks for the concept of the afterlife and hell. Gnosticism is a sort of spiritual movement that isn't its own religion, but rather took its base ideas and interpreted them with figures of various mythologies in order to tell their stories with figures already familiar to local peoples. Gnosticism is believed to have its roots in the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, with the Gnostic texts we have from sources like the Nag Hammadi Library being the latest of those schools' philosophies in very overt writings. These mystery schools were special initiation systems that taught secret ideas about local mythology in order to teach greater truths, both historical and spiritual. Gnostic Christian writings are thus just where these two schools of thought, both rooted in much earlier ideas, began to overlap yet again. In Gnostic texts, there are generally very large and complex symbolic cosmic structures that involve multiple dimensions. These structures were different from one text to another and more focused on elaborate ways to rethink the relationship of different figures and ideas to teach the reader to think in increasingly complex patterns and mindsets. In texts such as Pistis Sophia, the structure of the realms is that there are 3 levels of existence, the first being the pureness of light, the second being an intermediary spiritual dimension, and the lowest being the cosmic physical world. These beings are seen as inherently imperfect, and higher beings are generally seen as falling into this physical world by mistake or with bad intention. In the case of Sophia, she was in that middle dimension when she saw a light in the lower physical world that seemed to resemble the light of the higher world, and Sophia believed that she could go down to the physical world and use that light to help her rise up to that highest heaven. Sophia is Greek for wisdom, wisdom being a sacred figure in many of these mystery schools. Jesus himself is often considered the wisdom figure, one who has fallen into a human state for noble reasons. Sophia is thus sort of an inversion. Her tale is a tale of wisdom gained by being foolish.